Okay, so Games Workshop have just upset a huge portion of the 40k community. A lot of people are not letting it go, and this might surprise you, but I'm one of them. Probably doesn't surprise you though. But there's a lot more to this story than Games Workshop simply making a huge mistake, because this recent outrage has totally cleared the air and revealed a dark secret about the future of, specifically it seems, Warhammer 40k, as it looks like Games Workshop are in the middle of enacting a secret scheme that is not good for the community and not good for the game either. In fact, I would go so far as to say that we are looking at the Enshittification of Warhammer. And worst of all, this project has been introduced via the Trojan horse of something I've praised a lot of times on this channel. So, you know, I don't feel great about that. Now, the context of this change is that this month, the Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum, got their big update and release wave for 10th edition Warhammer 40k. They got a new codex, new models, new, well, everything. And this is a big deal. The Imperial Guard are one of the biggest Warhammer 40k factions, second only to like the most popular Warhammer army ever, the Genestealer cults, obviously. If you disagree, subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment below. And to give Games Workshop a little bit of credit here, at least the faction wasn't updated like one day before the end of the edition, like they're updated 9th edition. So, you know, that's good, I guess. Like your captor not setting you on fire. Kind of feels like the bare minimum though. Though I do suspect that that'll happen again in 10th edition. This time though, just to somebody else. Haha. Sure hope it's not Dark Eldar though, but we will see. Unfortunately though, this new major update does come with a radical shift from Games Workshop for the entire faction identity and playstyle, as the Imperial Guard faction has now switched from being about players creating their own regiments, customizing their own dudes, and creating lore for them, to instead being one where you play a weird hodgepodge of 3.5 official regiments. You see, Games Workshop have removed a bunch of options from the Guard, mostly centered around the generic Imperial Guard infantry archetype. And now, instead of generic infantry squads, every single unit in the army list now belongs to one of the official regiments of either Cadia, Deathcore Krieg, Katakan, LOL, or the Attillans. And as a player, you're just not going to get to choose which regiment each unit belongs to. It's set in stone on their unit profile. So it means if you want to use an artillery team in your army now, well, you're just gonna have to play a Deathcore of Krieg regiment, or a mixed regiment, no matter what. And that makes the Imperial Guard feel a lot smaller. And this is a radically different vision for what the Imperial Guard army looked like, especially when compared to how the entire faction was originally conceived back in the good old days. Originally, it used to be that you could make a regiment that had a coherent aesthetic and playstyle. Hell, I look back longingly on my 3.5 edition Imperial Guard Codex, and that had an entire custom regiment builder for the army. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't particularly balanced, but it was a ton of fun and a great story builder. And it even had a bunch of sample regiment, like my favorite, the glue-sniffing Savlar Chem Dogs. Now, despite this being a massive fundamental change to one of the major factions of Warhammer 40k, the response has been a little muted. Now, I get it. Most people play Space Marines. They don't really care about the NPC factions that I play. But if you don't know how Imperial Guard work, can you imagine a world where if you wanted an Intercessor Space Marine squad, you had to take them as Ultramarines? And if you wanted Assault Marines in your army, they had to be Blood Angels. And if you wanted a captain, they had to be a Rainbow Warrior captain. It would look really weird on the table, and it would feel really weird too. I mean, it wouldn't kill the flavor of your army, it would just change it completely. And that's what Guard players are now having to deal with this new codex. And I think Games Workshop have made this exasperating change from a place of, one, trying to sell cool miniatures, because they did a whole wave of Deathcore of Krieg minis and they look cool, and introducing them in plastic is good, but we also have to view this as part of the larger Games Workshop project of undermining kit mashing and custom lore and just general customization of your army within the Warhammer hobby. me. But also, I do suspect that the Games Workshop wanted to increase choice, so that if you do mostly play Acadian army, you could still choose to take some of the Death Korps of Krieg stuff. You don't need to play a sub-faction or buy a separate book. You know, you don't have to be just the one regiment. Similar to how the Attilan Rough Riders have always been a part of the Guard, available for anyone to take. It's just that in their instance, they were a tiny niche part of it. However, that all said, in practice, there was a far better way to do this. Games Workshop could have simply thrown a few different regiment torsos and heads into the different model kits that they're now introducing to the game, and that would mean that you could build all these new options with different regiment aesthetics. And maybe Games Workshop could have digitally designed their new sculpts from the beginning to support this. I mean, it's all digital tools now, right? I mean, and other companies do this. But because Games Workshop haven't, it means that in practice, they have removed choice utterly. And yes, obviously players can proxy and kit bash models still, and we could just ignore the fact that we're all being pushed into playing the GW vision of a mixed regiment force, but there's no support from Games Workshop for that, and it's expensive to buy multiple kits if you do want to kit bash your artillery team to look like Acadians. And honestly, all of that, it's not particularly satisfying. I don't want to have to proxy every single unit in my army, and I don't want to have to pretend that all those new units have a different regiment keyword. There's a reason why we're playing within the framework of the rules that Games Workshop set. There's a reason why we're not playing with just little colored blocks on a table. The aesthetics of our little plastic man, the rules, they all obviously matter a great deal. We demonstrate that every single day that we paint our miniatures and play a game of Warhammer 40k. Admittedly, not a lot of people are doing that last one, but still, you get my point. And for the record, I do love the look of the Death Korps of Krieg, even though most of my army looks like a Acadian force. But making parts of my army look like the Death Korps of Krieg should be an option. It should not be mandatory. If you want to use your whole army list, you shouldn't have to play with a completely different regiment. And frankly, it just kind of sucks to have a ton of new units for an army that I collect that literally just don't look like they belong to the same army. I guess Games Workshop expect people to just collect a brand new Imperial Guard army, even if they already own an Imperial Guard army. And speaking of which, this brings us to the fact that alongside the updated models, the Imperial Guard have also received a brand new combat patrol. And when I saw this combat patrol for the first time, everything clicked into place as I realized that this is all part of a much larger scale conspiracy that is going to impact every single Warhammer 40k faction, and in fact is already doing so. Much like the Great Jamaica Earthquake of 1692 impacted Port Royal, the wickedest city in the world, an experience that you can now try for yourself in the brand new skirmish miniature war game from today's sponsor Firelock Games called, appropriately enough, Port Royal. This is a unique campaign-based, tactical, small-scale, warband-sized skirmish wargame that is easy and fast to learn and play. In Port Royal, you'll take control of pirates, privateers, Native Americans, and more to do battle for delicious plunder among the ruins of Jamaica, all on your kitchen table. Each campaign of Port Royal is a totally unique affair, as your characters will gain experience, suffer grave wounds, and even discover rare treasure. The game even features a fully comprehensive and supported solo and cooperative mode for both campaign and single one-off games. So if you've always wanted to try a miniature war game but don't quite fancy murdering your mates, then this is the perfect introduction to the hobby. You can pick up Port Royal right now on the Firelock Games store linked below, but be sure to use my exclusive code Discourse Minis to get a special 15% off everything on the Firelock Games store, and that's for everything, the miniatures, the books, and more. So check it out below. There's incredible hard plastic, easy to build, easy to customize miniatures, all at an incredible price, and they just got cheaper if you use Discourse Minis. And thanks to Firelock Games for sponsoring today's video. So before we go any further, I'm putting in a content warning here because what you're about to see may shock and horrify you, and will likely get this video banned in 49 states and the Principality of Liechtenstein. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Okay, here it is. Boo! Behold! This is the upcoming brand new combat patrol for Imperial Guard. Yes, your eyes do not deceive you. This is the value box set for the army famous for 3 things: infantry, tanks, and artillery. For only 170 of your Earth dollars, you can get your very own Command Squad, okay, not bad. Kazarkin Squad, okay, good. And 2 Attilan Rough Rider squads. What the fuck? And that's it. That's the box entirely. So this is a bizarre product. It's an army you'd only get if you exclusively built your collection from things that you found by hooking through the bins out the back of Games Workshop. This is the army that is built using all the models gifted to you by your grandparents. It is cursed. It is a mess. Lumping 10 Rough Riders in this combat patrol and simply calling it a day is very fucking odd behavior from Games Workshop. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Attilan Rough Riders as an idea. They are a unit in the Imperial Guard. Fine, but they are not for me. And yes, they've been in the Guard since the 2nd edition, but even the most ardent Equophile breeding fan would have to admit that they're an extremely niche unit within the broader concept of the Guard. I've been playing for like 20 years. I've literally seen Attilan Rough Riders once. And I know 3 people that collect Imperial Guard. Sure, there's a world out there where there's some guy who absolutely loves cavalry and this is the perfect box for him. And fine, that's fine. But combat patrols are not meant to be for that guy. Combat patrols are meant to be the start collecting box, the place you go for the average collector to start their army, to the extent the Games Workshop actually replaced the officially named start collecting boxes with combat patrols. The start collecting boxes are now combat patrols, and previous combat patrol boxes were built to suit this vision. For example, here's the previous Imperial Guard box, which, by the way, is only 2 years old. In this box, you got heavy weapons, a sentinel, infantry, a command squad, and honestly, this still isn't a great box. It really feels like it's missing a vehicle, but compared to the new one, it's a full fucking coherent army. In the space of 2 years, we've gone from paying £100 or $170 for 28 miniatures and 400 points to only getting 20 models and like 300 odd points. It's a massive downgrade, and honestly, if I were a prospective new Imperial Guard player and I just wanted to start my collection today, I genuinely wouldn't know where to start. And as someone who already owns an army in real life, I'd say to that person, at this stage, start your army with a 3D printer, or maybe with Wargames Atlantic. It'll be far too expensive to buy the dozens of individual boxes of Imperial Guard that you'll need to have in order to have a coherent Imperial Guard army. And certainly, do not buy this box. I just straight up would not recommend this new Imperial Guard Combat Patrol, even if you owned nothing inside of it. There's just nothing of value outside of the Kazarkin in this box, and maybe the command team. It genuinely looks like it was designed to simply move Attilan Rough Rider sprues that I assume have not been selling. And I'm gonna be honest here, Games Workshop, these sprues have not been selling for a reason. Ironic, they're a cavalry unit and they can't move. So step aside 10th edition Gene Stealer called Combat Patrol. Make way, new Orc Combat Patrol. We have a new biggest Combat Patrol downgrade in Games Workshop history in this Imperial Guard box. But hold on. That's kind of weird, right? Gene Stealer cults, orcs, hell, even Space Marines and Blood Angels, Sisters of Battle. These have all gotten much worse combat patrols in recent years, and the selection inside these boxes have grown more niche as well. I mean, Gene Stealer cults just got a new combat patrol with a ton of bikes, which was really weird. In fact, the only recent combat patrol update that ended up, in my opinion, having a better selection of models than the previous one is the new Eldar box, and honestly, that's my opinion, that is very arguable, but even that box lost something really important. It lost a vehicle, lost the Wraith Lord. And actually, all of these new Combat Patrol bundles, they have all not only lost value for money and become much more niche, but they're also explicitly losing the vehicles inside their boxes when they get updated. Every single recent Combat Patrol is the same way. Sisters lost their Rhino in the update, Blood Angels lost their Impulsor, Gene Stealer cults lost the Rock Grinder, Eldar are losing their Wraith Lord, and Guard are now losing their Sentinel. And come on, the Sentinel barely even counts as a vehicle. It's like a tall Space Marine. And this is a pattern, right? It's a really weird pattern. Well, people have begun to notice notice it, and many are beginning to believe that this change is because these boxes are now being designed first for the Combat Patrol game mode, which GW currently struggle with balancing because vehicles in a small game mode, it's kinda rough, and as a result, the argument goes that the removal of these vehicles is just simply being done to balance all of Combat Patrol as a separate game. And yeah, I can get behind that. However, this made me realize that this change goes even further, because Combat Patrol bundles are transforming foundationally from value box sets designed as a way to start collecting an army for Warhammer 40k, or simply to buy multiple copies of to make otherwise extremely expensive armies a little bit less expensive, like the old Genestealer and Imperial Guard bundles, but instead they're being transformed into game boxes filled with niche units simply for the new game mode Combat Patrol, aka the bad version of Age of Sigmar Spearhead. And this change is allowing Games Workshop to remove useful units from bundles and fill Combat Patrols instead with sprues that aren't selling. Like, for example, I don't know, 10 Attilan Rough Riders. But even more importantly, this is allowing Games Workshop to erase the current consensus that Combat Patrol boxes are, and should be, designed to give hobbyists a good start into a Warhammer collection. I mean, look at the new Imperial Guard Combat Patrol. This is simply not worth buying unless you specifically want 10 Attilan Rough Riders, or if you're only going to play the new Combat Patrol game mode. Same with the Genestealer Cult box, you're gonna want bikes to make this worth it, or to use them in Combat Patrol. Same with the Space Marines, their Combat Patrol is now just Terminators, the end. But that's leaving a massive gap in the onboarding process of new hobbyists. People will still need to get started somewhere in Warhammer 40k, and they'll want a value bundle, and now the only place to go beyond Combat Patrol boxes is, I guess the once a year limited edition Christmas FOMO box, or the early access limited edition army box that comes around each time a codex is updated and usually sells out within seconds. And also, by the way, seems to be getting worse and worse every time it's released. This is a fundamental shift in how Warhammer is sold and how Combat Patrols and value bundles are being conceived of in Warhammer 40k by Games Workshop. And honestly, it's really bad. It's making the game almost impossible to get into affordably for some armies. I would say that Imperial Guard are actually just going to be impossible to buy into now. Like, in reality, if we were actually trying to conceive of a good Imperial Guard Combat Patrol, it should simply consist of a command squad, 20 infantry, 3 heavy weapons, a Leman Russ, and a Sentinel. That would be an awesome start to an Imperial Guard army. It would give a great cross-section of the faction, and it would still be under 500 points in game. But importantly, it would feel like a substantial product, especially for $170, and it would be worthwhile for even veteran hobbyists to pick up. And every army should have a starter box like that is available all year round. It would make the game so much more affordable. And frankly, they used to be around. That is what the old start collecting boxes used to be. But then they were replaced by Combat Patrol boxes, which were the same idea, but bigger and more expensive. And now, those original Combat Patrol boxes are being replaced by these new ones that are just expensive, and now they're terrible places to even start a collection. Except for the Eldar box. Again, that one feels like a better sample of the Eldar faction, but it still lost a ton of value, and you're gonna need to enjoy Dire Avengers. There's a lot of Dire Avengers there. I assume they haven't been selling. So, taking all that into account, overall, I think what we're witnessing now is the Enshittification of Combat Patrol box sets. Games Workshop just simply doesn't care anymore about making armies even relatively affordable. They just want value bundles to be cynical means to get rid of existing stock for a game mode that really hasn't been much of a success. Grid. Well, if you do want to start Imperial Guard going forward, I'm going to be recommending War Games Atlantic. There you can get like 24 models for 24 quid or $35. That's just so much better than anything that Games Workshop offer. Because otherwise, Imperial Guard will be impossible to buy unless you sell kidneys on the black market. And remember, those kidneys, they don't have to be yours. And you're already breaking the law. What's one more? And if you agree that the wargame hobby should be more affordable, then please check out my Patreon. I argue about this every other week, so help support me do that. Plus, you'll get access to bonus videos and reviews, as well as a live stream, and even a fun hobby community on Discord, and you'll get to hang out with me, which is good. It's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's only thanks to your support that I can keep making this content. So check it out on patreon.com/discourseminis. And I want to give a massive thanks to my patrons, especially Crypto Kev, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.